Hello, I'm Ngaire McDiarmid from Mining Journal, and today I'm speaking with Managing Director of Lake Resources, Steve Promnitz. Lake has 5 projects in the Lithium Triangle, and it's focused on developing its flagship Kachi brine project. Now, Steve, if we could start with the fact that you're positioning yourself as a clean lithium developer, for people new to the company, can you explain what this means?
Thanks so much, and thanks for the opportunity. Essentially, what we want to do is position ourselves as somebody who can produce a consistent, high quality, high purity product with low impurities. That's what the battery makers are looking for. And as we've seen over the last 5 years, battery technologies have improved out of sight. And so they need very high purity inputs. And then the second piece is that the electric vehicle makers are looking for better ESG outcomes, low carbon, low water usage, low land usage, anything that can tick that ESG box. And the only way to do that is to use a new technology. We partnered with a group out of California called Lilac Solutions, and they're using a very well-known technology called ion exchange. Ion exchange has been used for more than 70 years. It sits in water softeners when I was a kid on a farm. It's still used widely. All they did was adapt that to extract lithium directly out of the brine. And then that way we can return the brine back to its source and we can produce a very high quality product with significant ESG benefits. And we know that that is exactly what the market is looking for now. So that's how we've positioned ourselves to do that differently. There are a number of different types of direct lithium extraction. The one we're using is called ion exchange.
And I understand as part of that agreement, Steve, Lilac's going to be contributing up to $50 million. So if we look further into the financing side of things, and Lake Resources itself is fully funded through to a final investment decision. And as for project finance, you've had indications of support from both the UK and the Canadian export credit agencies. So what do you put that interest down to?
So our interest was to find long dated debt because debt isn't that easy to find for lithium. It's because only recently we've started to see fast markets listing it on LME, but it's not a standard commodity that's easy to hedge or is easy to deal with from a debt perspective. So we wanted to find long dated debt. Going to an export credit agency, we ameliorate the perceived risk of Argentina in the same way as having Lilac directly invest ameliorates that perceived risk of the technology. But really their interest in backing a project like ours comes down to 2 things. First of all, governments around the world want to be seen to be participating in this whole energy transition to electric vehicles. And we're seeing subsidies around the world, particularly in the EU, towards this sector, and now with the Biden administration in the US. And then secondly, we have genuine, measurable, significant ESG benefits. And so from a government banking perspective, that's a good thing to do. They want to be involved. Their push is to get their equipment and their services into a country, and then coming in with a project like ours, which is robust financially with ESG benefits and part of this whole transition, that's something you want to be seen to be involved in.
So if we look more closely at your flagship project, Kachi, you've got the indications of funding support. You're currently doing a definitive feasibility study looking at doubling production to 51,000 tonnes per annum. And you've also just appointed a chief operating officer to drive development. So what can people expect to see in the coming months?
Yeah, so what we wanted to do was de-risk the project, debt financing indicative in place. We've got 2/3 of the equity in place between ourselves and Lilac. And we know that we can get offtake agreements. So now it's time to actually build out that team. Chief Operating Officer first, we've got a project manager as well, we've just appointed with an engineering background, and then Gautam, our COO, will help build out that team so we can actually deliver it through feasibility study into construction and then into production. But for news items, look out for at least our first offtake agreement. Now, a number of investors have said, why don't you hurry up and sign one of these? There's a real benefit in not being in a hurry. There are only a handful of projects globally that haven't already signed away their offtake. We're seeing the demand increase between 5 and 10 times for lithium production over last year's production level over the next 10 years. And so we know that the market actually wants a product in lithium, and particularly the one that we're bringing of high quality and with those ESG benefits. Separately, you'll also see some news about our other projects. We have a number of projects at Kachi, at Olaroz, alongside people in production or in advanced development. And we'll be talking more over the Argentine summer about drilling there, about those brines, and then bringing on the next project into production. Then lastly, you mentioned the expansion case. When we come out with a definitive feasibility study in the second quarter next year, it'll either be embedded in the DFS or alongside it, showing how we can move from 25,000 to 51,000 tonnes per annum production. And that's being driven by two things: the sheer size of the demand, and also the fact that the debt providers are keen to support the debt for that expanded case. And so now when we're talking to offtake partners, we go, you've got about 6 months to sign this sort of product up, but then we've got some more projects coming. And our intention is to be a top 5 global producer. And indicatively, we're aiming to produce between 75,000 and 100,000 tonnes per annum on an annualized basis by 2030.
Well, Steve, you've just talked about the sheer size of demand and your talks with off-takers. Lithium prices have just passed their highs that they reached in 2018. So where do you believe the market is headed?
So we've seen the macro view for quite some time. If we go back to the middle of last year, you could actually see that we continued to announce new electric vehicles. We announced subsidies to support those electric vehicles and charging stations. Then we saw an increased demand in what we call gigafactories. The factories actually build these batteries for the electric vehicle makers. At the moment, that's 151 of those will be operating by the end of this year, out of about 245 or 247 that have been announced by 2030. That's up from 3 5 years ago. So it's a massive growth. What we haven't seen is the investment in the upstream supply chain, in nickel, in cobalt, in graphite, and in lithium. And oddly enough, although lithium is a very widely known product and able to be found, there just aren't that many projects moving towards production, and very few of those are financed. We actually have those in place. As we look forward, the demand, particularly for lithium, as well as the other battery metals, are anywhere between 5 and 10, maybe even 15 times in 10 years' time what we produced last year. Now, for any of us that have been in industries for a while, just doubling production is a push. So we need all of these lithium projects to come on stream and then some. So I think we're actually going to see a significant demand for ourselves. When we talk to offtake partners, we see a real squeeze coming in 2024, 2025. And that's why we've been targeting production in 2024 and then an expansion soon afterwards. And to get that scale, that sheer scale that you can scale up and be meaningful in the supply chain and be an independent producer, that's really going to resonate going forward.
Sounds like you've got a busy 2 years ahead, Steve. Thank you very much for the update today.
Oh, thank you. This is a very exciting times for all of us. This is a transition that we're going through over the next 10 years, which is going to impact on everybody on the planet. And we're just thrilled that we can actually be a part of that whole process. It's exciting that old guys can now be back talking to millennials and younger people again. Thanks for the opportunity.